I wish I could tell you all the things I heard when I was up in the sky as a flight attendant, because I had some pretty amazing conversations over the years. But if I told you everything I heard, I'd probably get banned from YouTube, so I'm not going to say it. But I'll give you some, rough ideas of the kind of things we used to talk about. I started flying in 1967 after seeing three UFOs up close. Got me really motivated. So, of course, I wanted to find out where they were coming from. And right away, I found out about the UFO cover up and how we weren't supposed to talk about it. While I was living in Chicago in 67, they had that problem with the swamp gas in Ann Arbor, Michigan. That was kind of big because a lot of people were seeing these saucer type UFOs. And of course, they called it swamp gas. And, over the years of flying, I heard so many incredibly fascinating stories from pilots and um, flight attendants and passengers about experiences with UFOs. And it certainly satisfied my curiosity as far as finding out, yeah, there's a lot of unexplained stuff out there. And I've even had experiences with beings that I would say could be from another dimension, even because many times when I've wanted to make a big decision in my life, it's like a very tall entity. I can feel their presence. I don't see them, but I can feel it, and it'll give me the direction I'm supposed to go in. Like, I went to college for 2 years before I started flying, which it was actually the perfect length of time because I could start flying when I was 20. We had all these parameters. You could only be, I think, 20 to 28 at the oldest. You had to look a certain way, weigh a certain amount, have, you know, nice teeth, good eyesight, no glasses, couldn't be married, couldn't have children, all these things. I mean, you had to fit the mold. But that was okay because as long as you fit the mold and you got the job, you got to step into a lifestyle that was pretty awesome because all of a sudden everybody wanted to know you. You weren't really treated like a servant back in the 60s because you were a hot stewardess. And, they built that up with the sexist thing. I didn't even realize it until a few years ago, but they were actually advertising that if you took a flight, you just might meet your wife, a stewardess. I was wondering why all these guys were always proposing to me. I'll never forget one day I was actually arguing with this one man. He kept saying, if you marry me, you can quit your job. I said, why do I want to quit my job? I love my job. He said, oh no, you'll live a wonderful life. And I said, well, what would I do with myself? He said, oh, you could play bridge every day at the country club. Boring, not for me. So I kept flying. I didn't get married for the first time until I was 30. Had a blast in my 20s. But some of the things I heard were really, I look back now, prophetic, mind-blowing. I can remember we were kind of like geisha girls in the 60s. We were expected to be conversationalists, calm people down because there was a lot of fear of flying. Sometimes we actually had flights that were nothing but men between like Chicago and New York. They got cigars, a steak dinner, and it was all men on a airplane, maybe a Caravel, which was one cabin. And it was a very sexist time in many ways, but actually we had a lot more fun back then because people did flirt with each other. They worked really hard to, get the attention of an attractive woman because, you know, they wanted to go out with her, so they would be very super, polite, chivalrous, picked up our suitcases. We never had wheels back in the 60s, didn't need them. Somebody always wanted to carry our bag for us if we let them. They wanted us to go out to dinner with them in uniform. It was really interesting. And if you were clever, you could really pick the brains of some very powerful, interesting people, which I was all about because I also considered being a TV news person just to find out the truth I'm always looking for the truth. Well, as we moved along from the 60s to the 70s, we found out we became more utilitarian and less geisha girl than we were like in the 60s. And I remember one day a supervisor was on my flight and she said, Rebecca, we're moving into a time now where we don't want you to talk to the passengers. I said, really? I mean, that was my favorite thing to do, is to find out what was going on with, different people. And she said, no, we're not going to talk to passengers anymore like we did. Then I remember having some training in the 70s, and the trainer explained to us that we had to change our mental attitude because of the coarsening of America. Now you got to realize in the 60s, everybody was polite. Everybody lived by a code of conduct. They got dressed up to fly. You never had to intervene. People were actually very, very, very well behaved. And we, being a symbol of authority in our very well cut uniforms, looking good, they listened to us. They listened to the pilots. And it was a whole different era. They got beautiful, beautiful food, though. Fabulous food, fabulous service. Everything was first class. It was before deregulation. If they needed money at the end of the year, the government picked up the bill. So it was actually, that's why it was the golden age of aviation. There was plenty of money backing the airline industry. And that was part of what made it so luxurious. And then, of course, that all changed with deregulation, and it just slowly moved into being like a subway up in the sky or a bus, and everything changed. But I did fly for 35 years, and I would have kept flying if it weren't for 9/11, but I was Boston based. I was that close to getting on that airplane that hit the tower. That was a horrible, horrible, horrible time in aviation history. And, we're still talking about it over 20 years later. But it's in my book, What Happened to Me. And I wrote this book, Secrets of a Metaphysical Flight Attendant, that you can either get on my website. It's also on Amazon. But, some of the other things I heard that were very, very interesting. I remember this one passenger who was sitting in first class. He might have been part of the elite class. I don't know. We had everybody flying with us back then because we didn't have as many private jets. Everybody flew commercially. So we met celebrities, politicians, famous people, VIP, they'd be listed as VIPs on our manifest, so that we would know they were supposed to be treated like they were special sometimes. And this particular man that was sitting in first class, we got into a conversation, and at one point he said to me, well, I hope you're moving your money offshore. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, there's going to come a time where you won't even want to be living in America. There'll just be marauding gangs of young men looting and shoplifting and stealing, and it won't be safe. Now, he told me this maybe 25, 30 years ago, but he seemed to know what he was talking about. And I wonder sometimes if we are kind of catching those times that he mentioned. I hope not. America is a great country, and we have amazing people living here, brilliant people that can solve problems. And if we would just focus on positive solutions and get rid of all this creepiness that I see that has infiltrated people's minds, because they're starting to think like confused, ignorant people in many ways. We need to wake up, study metaphysics, develop your intuition. You have a moral compass inside of you that knows the difference between right and wrong. Freedom is why America was founded. And if you want to keep your freedom, you've got to claim it. You've got to exercise it. You've got to stand up for it. You've got to have dominion. You've got to wake up. That's all I have to say. If you want to get in touch with me, go to my website, RebeccaTripp.com.